Levi, thank you so much for doing this work all these years with me, and also for having this conversation to share with others in the network and people who are curious about what happens in a coaching relationship. So first, I'd love if you would just introduce yourself, both in regards to your work, responsibilities, and also you as a whole human being.
Great, thank you, Lev. So my name is Levi Gershkowitz. I am the CEO and founder of Living in the Light. Living in the Light is a patient advocacy initiative. Our focus is on telling the stories of people, of families, of individuals affected and living with rare genetic diseases. And we do so through spending time with them and getting to know life as impacted by those different conditions. Our modes of storytelling are predominantly through photography, writing, videography, and events. Once upon a time, in-person and live events. Recently, the past 14, 15 months, a lot of digital events. But primarily our work is focused on presencing the experiences and the knowledge of people living in between, a little bit in between realms of what is it like to know that you or your child has a metabolic condition that could very well cause the end of their life. And so we're in that place, and we work with a lot of biotech companies to make sure that their company culture is developed with a knowledge of patients' needs. And really, we don't talk so much about patients, we talk about people. So it's a demedicalizing process of sharing where people are coming from in their experience of living with a rare disease and what type of new experiences and knowledge that brings to them, and making sure that that knowledge transfers into the process of people trying to develop new treatments and therapies to help them.
Thank you. Just want to presence the t-shirt that you gave me, Story as Medicine, and really, celebrate and honor and acknowledge that commitment to storytelling in a human way. Mm-hmm. And would you like to just share a word about that?
Yeah, well, one of the mode that we practice, or that we are practitioners of, is narrative medicine. It's acknowledging that narrative storytelling and experience, and how that lives in the body through memory, is part of medicine. It's part of be it someone's healing process or even a diagnostic process, how we hold what we're living through, how we hold grief, how we hold opportunity, all these things that develop into a story, that has a medicinal quality, and that we believe that it is part of, and essentially a part of, the drug development process, so that as new medicines are being developed, that will hopefully one day have high rates of efficacy and be approved by the FDA and become available in the United States and global markets. Part of that process, we hold true, is story, and that we are remembering those that were lost along the way to those diseases, and how those technologies were developed, and making sure that we're not just looking at outcomes as in patient-reported outcomes, but qualities of life, hopes and dreams that we all have, and making sure that those remain intact. So Story as Medicine is also part of what we can do to write future chapters in people's lives for healthy and fulfilling lives.
Thank you for that work, and for elaborating those words. It's important. So before we started working together, I'd love for you to paint a picture of your life and work.
Sure, thank you. So for the context of anybody listening, this is going back now just about 3 years. I think this fall, around that time, we'll probably be coming up on 3 years of working together. So where was I 3 years ago? I was a little bit more than a year into purchasing and owning my first home. So learning, getting a kind of a crash course in home-based systems. That was certainly having an impact on my business as well. I had a team, I think at that time, of 4 people. We had not yet moved into our office headquarters, so we were still working out of a co-working, kind of remote co-working space, and hadn't yet fully landed in a brick and mortar building. And so I would say, where was I? Where were we? Our roots were not very deep, but in a lot of places. And so I can talk about that theme a little bit later of where our roots sit now, both in my personal life and professional life. Anywhere else where we were? Also important to note is we were probably 6 years into the development of a thriving business. So despite not, having a brick and mortar and not having certain systems or modes of communication in place, we were working all across the US and internationally. We probably had at least 7 active clients that we were providing work for. We were traveling a lot. We were creating a lot. We were editing and printing books and putting up installations of photography and written materials in private and public settings globally. So we were working, and maybe at a rate where we hadn't yet put the brakes on to go, what do we need to do to care for ourselves so that we can also care for our work and our clients and our participants?
Yeah, thank you. And so when we did start working, what was at stake for you that allowed you or motivated you to say, yes, let's do this?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, a question like that is so much easier to answer now in hindsight, because what was at stake was burnout, right? Like that's at stake for everybody, is burnout, loss of passion, loss of direction, kind of business as usual. That type of mindset, I think, is actually always at stake. And that's something that I, would say our work kind of hones and trims, and we're trimming the sails to always kind of be like, where is my true north as the one leading the company? And so we can get into that more, because I think also some of our work has actually led to more horizontality within how we function as a company. So it's not just one leader, but how do we raise a team of leaders? How are there many people at the helm, or ready to take over when somebody else needs to step back? So what was at stake also, and it was isolation. So I personally was experiencing a lot of isolation in the fact that, I mean, I've already described a little bit of what we do. I'm sure a lot of people listening are like, huh, what? Or have a few questions, because it's like, I've never heard of that before. Well, very few people have. And so, because though we've been able to create such a unique niche and function well within that, there aren't always that many people that I or other members of the team can go to talk about the work that we do, talk about the physical impact, the psycho-spiritual and the somatic impact it has on us, and the intellectual, capacity that we have to hold in order to do this work. So what was at stake with, not having a coach at the time was feeling isolated, because a real question I had was also around transparency. I had other members of my team, but at that time they were all contractors. I didn't have anybody else on salary. I think I had only recently come onto salary myself. So where I talk about isolation and transparency is that some of the only people that I could talk to about the work were working for me, and based on the relationship, it maybe wasn't appropriate to say, oh, I'm having a question about the structure of the business. Like that's not necessarily something you are going to ask a contractor. One, because it may affect their role, but it may also affect other things that they may not be very well equipped or experienced to answer. So I'd say what was at stake was moving into deeper trenches of isolation and issues around transparency and with whom and how do I communicate questions that I have about business development and organizational development and thought leadership.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really clear. I appreciate it. So then, you said yes. I was excited. Hope you were excited. You're ready to go, and we got into it. And I'd love for you to describe what the it is. What is coaching? What do we do? What together and both, in the one-on-one context, but also the work we've done with your team.
Right.
And then also just, I'll come back and remind you, but the different phases in a sense of the work.
Yeah. And I may not touch on all of them, but one, by no means am I equipped to answer the question, what is coaching? I think what I can answer is what is it to be coached by Lev Natan? Because I think one of the things that I really appreciate is your approach. But I will also say it's not like I had worked with coaches before. And maybe to reverse back to your last question, either of what was at stake or like where were we at? I imagine I would have eventually started working with a coach in some capacity. Like it was on my radar, but it wasn't something that I was actively pursuing. So I'm glad that it was you, and then so I'll answer from there. Like, what is it that we actually do? Well, it has evolved over the years, but I can say that we always start with a presencing exercise, something that brings not just me to the current moment, but us to the same current moment. Like we have had the opportunity to do some of our sessions in person, and we don't live very far from each other, but I think the work that you do actually is very beneficial to do remotely because I'm in the structure of my week and my day, and yet I can like get tuned up in a conversation with you. So what we do is like a tuning. We often we do some vocalization, either humming or toning to kind of, which brings me a little bit into my body and reminds me that I have a spine, that there's an up and a down, that there's directions, and that there's qualities, right? That there's different qualities in my body in terms of where does inspiration come from? Where does vision come from? Where does listening come from? Like those are distinct from each other, and they come from different parts of my body. So by going through the channels, I feel attuned to you, more attuned to where I'm at, like my energy level, and then reminded of my capacity and my limitations. From there, we kind of do a brief check-in, which may sometimes involve you putting on some background music, and I'm doing some writing. It may involve a brief check-in if there was like something from the previous session that we want to presence early on to be like, hey, remember we were right here? Where are you now? And then we kind of go through with it. Sometimes I bring the agenda, sometimes you bring the agenda. I think when we're both really on it, we've communicated like a couple days in advance via voice note or email or text message to say, hey, here's what's going on, so that we can both prepare. And again, it's helpful to have an agenda, but at times it's not needed. I think we've gotten into a groove where we can make good use of time with or without the prep work. But there are certainly times when I've really benefited from having that or making you aware, hey, I'm giving a talk, a public talk in 6 days. I want to use our session this week to go over not just the content and the approach of my talk, but how best to prepare my schedule that week so that I'm in a mindset to do it well. So I can bring something forward, and likely too, and you have brought things forward where you've been in reflection and said, I think we need to spend not our whole session, but maybe half of our session talking about this. Something else too, I would say for anybody who hasn't yet worked with you in this capacity, in the beginning, I think you were also in the role of an educator, like you welcomed me in and to some of the philosophy and methodology of the work that you do. I think you used a whiteboard a lot. You sent me some attachments, made a couple recommendations for books to read, just to kind of get me caught up to speed with some of the mindset and even some of the terminology that we were going to be using. So there was a little bit of kind of on-ramp educating and getting in the mode. And then something else I think that's important to say is that a lot of our coaching that we've done hasn't just been individually. There was times when I actually had you working with our entire team up to the point I think we were 7 people, and we were having monthly resonance call circles. We currently haven't continued that model collectively with you, but our work with you for I think an entire year of facilitating resonance circles really bled nicely and has influenced the way we hold our weekly meetings, and when we elevate those weekly meetings to be more of a resonance circle design. So you've also worked independently with all members of my team, kind of in like an somewhat HR capacity, where you were a neutral third party heart and ears and eyes to witness what people were going through if and when it was a situation where they maybe weren't comfortable directly addressing another individual on the team or myself, or they were able to schedule and work with you independently to either resolve issues or gain resources and communication models to kind of in a healthy way start to talk about what the needs were. So those are all ways that you've helped us. And then last thing that we do is we often make sure to voice gratitude and to celebrate and register our accomplishments. So we're not only looking forward, but we take time to really look back at what we've done. And I would say one of the things that I really get out of our work together is it has enabled me to hold myself accountable to myself, because you're there as witness. So if I tell you, hey, and this is something we were talking about right just recently, hey, I really need to take a vacation. I need to step away from work at Living the Light to focus on some other things going on in my life. And that's been mirrored to me by my team, who are like, Levi, you need to take a vacation. Like, you haven't done that in a while. So when I told you that became, the subject of our time together. And then you're checking in with me on that, like, hey, when are you scheduling vacation? For how long? What are the parameters? So in that way, just an example of how it's helping through my accountability to you is actually deepening my accountability to myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. I'd love to hear, how has this process, this way of communicating and having conversations resulted in, the way that you work and the outcomes that have unfolded in your company, kind of like the ripple in the pond. We're having conversations, and there's different patterns that are unfolding in your life and your work. And so what do you see? So there's the practices that we're doing, and then there's the practices and the ways that you're engaging your life and work that in a sense don't have anything to do with me, right? I'm not there, right? So
a few things come to mind, and it's a great question, and I think a lot of this is speculative, because like, how do we really know, right? If I were to remove you from the equation, how do I know what would have been or wouldn't have been? What I can say is our work and my life, my lifestyle and approach to relationships, to community, is very process driven. So working with you has enabled me, and by default the company, to stay very focused on process. Yes, product, deliverable, timeline are all really important. But without letting those things waver, we're able to give the necessary time to the work that needs to take place to maintain. I don't want to use the metaphor of a machine. I'd rather use a natural metaphor, right? But like, how are we tending to the garden? So we can get beautiful blooms and we can get, voluptuous fruit and really nice vegetables from the garden, even for a season, maybe for 2 seasons. But if we're not on top of the weeding, or identifying what those weeds are, maybe moving them to their own place, if we're not on top of the soil composition, the pathways of water, if we're not focused on process, then after a season or two, we're not going to get the same yields that we got. So we've been able to maintain our quality and our yields, but our work with you has really helped us to maintain our process and make sure that we're tending internally to the needs of the organization, which are often interpersonal dynamics. It's to make sure that between myself and the other folks I'm working with on a regular basis, that our communication remains respectful and that we take time back to check in and have a healthy balance between enjoying each other's company and getting work done. So I think our work with you has really helped to shine light on that and to inform and influence our company culture around, one, like I said, how we register our accomplishments and make sure that we're not only constantly chugging forward, but while we're doing that, we take breaks, or while we're doing that, we also look back and be like, yeah, look at that thing that we finished on a Tuesday, even though we still have a deadline, to finish before the week is over. It's funny to even say that, like that feels like company speak. We're not really very deadline focused, which maybe some of our clients would reflect. We're focused on process and what we produce. And because we work with people and people's stories, we move at the rate of trust. We move at the rate of that's healthy. And so sometimes it's actually healthy to go quick. And sometimes it's healthy to say, not this month. And something else that you've helped to attune and keep in check is that our moral compass and our ethics stay strong and clear. You've been a really great sounding board when I'm like, hey, I'm really struggling with something. This is something that's happened. This is something that I've noticed. It seems like it's a pattern. It could even be systemic within capitalism. It could be systemic within the industry we're working in. And you've been there to listen and help deconstruct so that we can then decide if and how and often when we're going to say something, we're going to do something, or when we're going to shift and accept and say, we may not be able to influence a change there, but we can influence a change here. And then we put our attention there, and that's the direction we go in. Mm-hmm. So a lot of gratitude for you also for just the patience of listening to, all of what you hear, because I imagine on your end, you have to have some really fine and clear filters because there's a lot coming through and we have a limited amount of time. And so you're listening for like these key pieces that then get reassembled and you deliver them back in a way that kind of help us to see the path forward or a path forward, right? These are all options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that focus that you're speaking about and leverage points in a sense, where can my and our impact truly be felt in a positive way, in a value rich, enriching way. Beautiful. Well, why do you keep doing it? We're still going strong here.
Sure. Pattern, habit, commitment, right? I think that in today's, US-based economy, money-based economy, it's like we vote with our dollar. I really believe in that. One of the influences I have is personally or for business, how we spend our money where we invest, where we divest. So one of the reasons we continue to do it is because we really believe in the work that you're doing, especially in support of the Alliance for a Viable Future, which is something that we haven't been as involved in, but by knowing that we're supporting your business, we know we're supporting the larger efforts and vision. So there's that kind of contract, social contract of saying, I see what you're doing and who you are. I believe and support that. And so part of my commitment to showing up to this work is support of that. The other is knowing that we receive a lot of benefit. You know, we've been talking probably for 20 minutes already, or I have, and I've reminded myself of why we do this work. Something that seems just really important to note is the friction. Often it's an internal friction. It's like, I wake up and I'm like, I do not have time in my day for another Zoom call. Like with my coach, with my whoever, like I don't have time for it. And yet, even though there's that friction of like another thing on the schedule, another thing to check off, when we step into it, and often when I verbalize that friction, it helps everything else just kind of slough off. The attunement comes, the clarity comes. You sometimes bring me back to who I was like 5 years ago or 10 years ago. 10 years ago would have been like right at the time of living in the light was starting, and bring me back to center. And then it's like, oh, I can breathe again, because even if it's just for the hour and a half or so that we're together, the weight that's on my back is like off. And then even though my week is busy, my day is busy, I find a moment of clarity that reminds me of why I love this work. Also, that reminds me of just a brief story. Maybe many of the people that come to work with you have a body-based practice and a mindfulness practice. I certainly do, and in gaining the skills and resources for that, I sat a couple Vipassana courses. And I remember in one in particular, it's the first 10-day retreat that I completed. A question came up at the end for the teacher, which was, okay, we come away from this 10-day experience basically being told, now you know how to meditate as a Vipassana meditator. We recommend that you meditate for an hour in the morning and an hour at night. Like, that's a pretty hefty, at the time, actually coming out of 10 days, you're like, oh, only 2 hours, not 9 hours? I can do that. But, fast forward 2.5 days and you're like, I don't have 2 hours to meditate. I do not meditate for 2 hours a day. But the question came up to the teacher, well, what do I do on days when I don't have that much time available? And the response was, when you don't have the time to meditate for 2 hours, meditate for 3. And it's like, it hits for a second. Then you realize what the gem, the seed of that teaching, which is when you have so much going on that you don't have time for, I won't call it self-care. There is an element of self-care, but sharpening the tool, tuning the system, trimming the sails. When you don't have time to tend to the vehicle, the vessel that's going to get you there, take more time to tend to the vessel, because something's off. And that is a trope that is expressed in our time together. I have to remind myself of that lesson sometimes once or twice a month when I'm like, I don't have time for this call right now. I'm not ready to be coached. That's when I need my coach. That's when I need my inner coach, which I actually feel is expressed, by you. So yeah, I wanted to share that little story.
Yeah, it's really captures what I'm committed to. Sharpening the tool, like you're saying. Sharpening the instrument. Me being the instrument, you being the instrument. Because that's, we've talked about in this moment making a decision that has ramifications a year out, 5 years, 10 years out, right? If there's a 1 degree difference between what I'm going to decide now, or then we're going to have an hour-long conversation, and then it's a 1 degree to the right or to the left, a year out, 10 years out, that's a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, sharpening the instrument or the tool of my own awareness and consciousness. Thank you.
Exactly. Oh, thank you. And also just thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. I think it's important. I imagine people on the other side of this video are maybe thinking about working with you or working with you in one capacity, but knowing that there's opportunities to work in another. And I just really respect the expansion and growth that I've also witnessed, right? Like in you over the time, and your professionalism, your communication, as well as naming things that are important to you, doing men's work, environmental sustainability and community-based work, indigenous rights and activism, and a nature-based system for organizational development. Like, you talked to me about those things years ago, and those have been primary colors in the what you're painting. And so I support all of those things, and just want to acknowledge and both admire what I'm seeing in the development of you as well. And so I think that of course, coaching is like therapy and other things. It's predominantly, if not fully, a one-way act. We're focused on me, my life, and my work and business. But because we're in this model, I just wanted to also acknowledge the growth that I'm seeing, and the fact that you chose those angles, right? Those 1 degrees, and I see you sticking to them. And that model, that model something to me that helps me stick to the degrees that I set for myself as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Makes me want to say a lot more things, and like gets me really excited for you to name those aspects of the work and how it's growing, and maybe we'll footnote that conversation and just kind of hold the energy there in a strong and potent way to keep the hunger strong for the next conversation. So yeah, just thank you so much, Levi, for everything that we're doing together, and what you're doing, and supporting your team and your sphere of influence. And if there's any final words before we close out that you'd like to share with me and with the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's important whenever we can to take a moment just to bless all the things that enable us to be here, right? That there's a reminder that that our lives are, and therefore can be, in service to greater purpose. And the medicine tree, like, it's often over your shoulder, and I often think of, like, as above, so below, and as below, so above, this dynamic, and that there's things that are seen, and that there are things that are unseen. And so it's been really beautiful to work with and grow a friendship, even in a collaborative community conversation with someone who sees and knows and experiences the below ground, and holds that in as much importance as the above, because it's rare, right? It's rare to bump into each other sometimes, and it's rare to find that in the business place and the workplace. And so it's refreshing also, and revitalizing. So just a blessing that your work continues to spread to the people that need to find you, and likewise for myself and those listening, that we get our needs met, so that we can be in service to the thing that needs us.
Amen.
Oh, all right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.